What up, Oasis?
Oh, we're starting.
Yeah.
Hi, guys. My bad. I wasn't ready. That was fantastic.
Yep.
I didn't know we were. I mean, Emily is.
She's ready to go.
She's great at what she does.
Sometimes.
You were real sneaky at that record button push. Didn't even know you pushed it.
I don't think I did either.
That was impressive. Yeah. Nice job.
We're here. We're doing the thing. Podcast.
We are here. We are here. We are here. Back to back weeks.
2 episodes in a row.
That's 2 in a row.
I don't know if Dr. Seuss is the guy we want, just like consistently finding space in the podcast, though.
Yeah. I mean, at one point, Emily, this was before your time on the Oasis podcast. We were going to try to throw in, I think, office references consistently, and it fell immediately.
Yeah. That was probably good, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But
Hey, I got a question. I always have a question.
You do.
But what is, like, your pettiest pet peeve?
mm-hmm. I'll start with like the large umbrella one,
'Kay.
and then I'll narrow in on the one that I feel like is the one that really irks me. I have one of my like large scale grand pet peeves is when people lack social awareness in public settings. So you're in the grocery store and you're standing with your cart right in the middle of the aisle, or like stuff like that, or like I'm walking behind you and you just like consistently keep backing up and like you are completely oblivious that there could be other people trying to navigate this area. But the one that like I narrow in on is it drives me berserk when someone like leaves out a door in front of you and doesn't even take a glance to see, is there someone behind me that I might want to hold this door for?
Oh, really?
Yes,
Interesting.
dude.
Yeah.
And I get it. Sometimes, you find you're in that awkward zone where like you go through a door and someone else is like 15 feet behind you and you're like, do I wait? And then they feel the urge to hustle and then it's kind of awkward. I always try to side on the yes. I'd rather be more patient to let them.
Oh, yeah.
But like there are so many times where you're walking through a door and someone is like, we were leaving a baby doctor's appointment. I am holding the car seat with my child and this man is 3 feet in front of me. He opens the door. He opens it just enough for him to slide out with his shoulders, and then he shut it like right in my face. But he was totally unaware that I was even behind him. So I'm not like mad at him. It's just my pet peeve. It's like just take a peek. There could be someone that you could help out 2 feet behind you.
Yeah. I think my pettiest one is when in a parking lot, people walk down the middle of the parking
Lack
aisle.
of social awareness,
It
dude.
is. That's where it falls on.
Yeah.
Under, for sure. Just walk down. You're walking down the middle.
Yeah.
There's enough room for you to be on the side. And I'll look, and especially if Abby's in, I go, "What are these guys doing?" And then when I say that, I know.
Yeah.
Am I okay?
Yeah. No. I feel that.
I feel like mine, part of this is Hy-Vee's fault. Part of it is like social awareness. But the self-checkout area at Hy-Vee.
Oh, yeah. That is a mess.
Because there's like 4, and then there's a section of 2. And then there will be people that have been waiting for like 10 years.
But they don't have a waiting line.
They don't have a waiting line.
There is no waiting
There
line,
is
which is
just stuff in the middle of it. So like people are trying to get through the aisles. You're always constantly in the way. Nobody knows who's next. But then you'll have like one of the 2 that are alone will open up, and instead of someone who's been waiting for the 4 to go to the 2, someone will just like sneak in, and there's just like no system and no line to it.
Do you guys know what I do when I'm in those moments?
You just walk
hey,
out.
there's one over there.
1,000%. Whoever's waiting first. And I say it out loud so everyone around can hear it. 100%. Oh, I think you were here first. There's one free over there.
There you go.
As aggressively loud.
Yeah, I think if people just lived their lives with a little bit more like head on a swivel, I think a lot of problems could probably be solved. A lot of irritability could go down if people were just semi-aware of who they are and where they're at and what's going on around them.
Or maybe we just need to focus on being patient and loving those around us.
Yeah, it's
as
true.
followers of Jesus.
That's good. Next time someone backs into me.
That's a different episode.
Yeah. You're gonna tap him on the shoulder. Hey, just so you're aware, I am standing back here. I'm gonna wait for you to do your thing, but once you're done, if you could please.
Did you forgive the old man who slid through the door?
And like I said, I'm not really mad at him, and I'm not really mad at like people who do that, because I get like it's probably just maybe it's like an upbringing thing. I don't know like why. My mom was always like, don't do these things. Like,
be aware of it.
If I was a kid, yeah, like I could
Abby's
just,
really good at that, telling her kids that.
Like, so maybe it's just an upbringing. Maybe I'm mad at their parents. Right? No, just kidding. And I'm not like mad. I'm just like, bruh, it's like one of those.
Oh my God.
That's the statement of the year. I think it took us till the middle of December. Mm-hmm. We found the quote of the year.
This is getting released in January.
Dang it.
Does it still count?
2025.
Sorry, guys. Did I just break the fourth wall with our podcast listeners?
Or we're starting the year really strong.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Quote of the year. 2020. What is it next year? 5.
Five.
Oof, I should know that.
But I think the thing with pet peeves is like they're things that we can kind of get over. Like we can, you might be irritated for a little bit, but you kind of move on and you move past it. But as we are people who are constantly surrounded in relationships, as we constantly rub up against our own brokenness and the brokenness of others, we're going to have to forgive people because we're going to naturally be hurt. Conflict is inevitable. But I think that forgiveness is something that we like to put a lot of stipulations on to say why we shouldn't have to forgive someone when there is a very clear call by Jesus that we are called to forgive every single person that we will ever run into contact to. And so I think as we start the podcast today, we're going to start with what forgiveness is, and then we'll kind of get into the weeds. And so have an open mind. Don't write us off just yet. But I think there is a beautiful invitation for us to show the gospel and to reveal God's love by the ways that we're willing to forgive others.
Yeah, it's good. And in forgiveness, as we define it, there's a simplicity to it, even though it's really messy sometimes.
Yeah, and I think part of it comes, and I love how you said that, have an open mind, because when the conversation of forgiveness comes up, right next to that in people's minds is the places where they need to forgive.
Yeah.
And so as you're opening a podcast on forgiveness, you're thinking about that person who hurt you, that relationship that's not right. And so there's just automatically stepping into a conversation, just this pent up kind of usually emotion. And in the midst of that, there's like the expectation of what the church thinks this could be, right? Good. Or there's your own sense of perception of what you think we're about to tell you for forgiveness. And it might be a little bit different than what you're thinking.
Yeah, and at the end of the podcast, we're going to forgive everyone who's ever hurt us on the podcast.
Hopefully.
No,
publicly.
Yeah.
Publicly. Okay, sure. I'll get my sticky note out. No, I'm just kidding.
But one of the places we can look scripturally is in Matthew 18, and this is a chapter in which Jesus is teaching his disciples and followers what it looks like to handle conflict in the church. And so he gives pretty practical instructions of go have an in-person conversation. If they don't receive it, then go take a trusted person with you that can have a second conversation, and if not, then you need to remove yourself from it. But then he goes into, Peter tries to hype himself up, and he's like, well, what if I forgive my brother 7 times? And Jesus redefines forgiveness as something that is unlimited, as something that we don't count how good we did, but something that every single time we're willing to give it to the full. He also then shares this story about the parable of the unmerciful servant, and it's this guy who receives, his debt is completely forgiven. His family was going to have to go into slavery, but his response to this incredible gift he received is to then go find this other guy who owes him money and to try and throw him in jail. And so I think what we clearly see is that our response to God's forgiveness should be a willingness to then forgive others to the fullest extent possible.
And Jesus does such a good job of just he gives practical tool. Then Peter does, this is the human response to the practical tool. That's what Peter does, is he's not yes, he's the put your foot in your mouth. Yes, he's the bold and brash. Yeah, but he is the natural human inclination to Jesus's teaching. It's this is what we usually...
So what exactly does this look like?
Yes, and this is what I'm going to do. And this is what's expected of me, and this is how I'm going to overachieve. And Jesus humbles him in this conversation. And then he gives the parable to just put the exclamation point on this beautiful chapter. Oh, so good.
Yeah, it's super good.
And so what we kind of see from this is that forgiveness is an active choice to let go of bitterness and even our own perceived power in a situation. And so it's recognizing that God is the ultimate authority. He is the one who is in charge. He will bring about justice on his timing, and we can trust in that. But it's also freeing ourselves from the burden of carrying anger and bitterness. Yeah. I think, too, forgiveness is also sometimes a process. And so it's sometimes asking the question of what can I do today to live in forgiveness? It's not always just a one-time decision that I made 5 years ago and I never have to confront again. But it's also sitting in the daily choice of choosing to forgive someone. And
that's the whole idea of Peter saying, 7 times, and Jesus saying 77. The number isn't what matters, which is why he uses a ridiculous number. Because if you're counting the amount of times and making the check mark of, I did it this many times, you lose the spirit of what forgiveness means and offers. So and a lot of times in that, so it's not about this many times or even a one-time thing. It's there's a reality even in that. Well, why? So there's one reason he says that number, and then the second he says 7 times 77. There's a reality where, because forgiveness both is a simple yet complex thing, that there are going to be daily moments where you might have to, based off of what you feel or a pain or even a seeing of I got to forgive again. Doesn't mean I didn't forgive in the past. I'm a daily walking in this because I'm releasing hurt and pain that's happened against me.
And I think part of it is the diminishing of the bitterness and burden over a period of time, right? Because it's not hey, the first time you do it, it's completely gone. But hopefully by the grace of God in you, he's starting that work of transformation where the bitterness and burden that you're holding, the debt you feel like you're owed is diminishing slowly. Like I can think there are still times where years, maybe a decade ago, someone hurt me. And when that comes back up into my mind, I can still feel the sting of that. And when I do, the Lord leads me to forgiveness. But it's not the same like angst that it was 10 years ago. And I think part of that is the forgiveness process, that I don't have that same emotional attachment to it because I've done 10 years, like a bunch of times I've come like that has gotten me to the place where hopefully one day that grievance is so small that it's negligible or completely gone.
The releasing becomes easier of the feeling of pain. That's good.
I think time helps, but like as you said, you made intentional choices over a span of time to walk in forgiveness. So it wasn't just I'll wait 10 years and hopefully it doesn't hurt anymore, but it was saying what are the things that I can do day by day to grow in this.
An intentional can have this idea that we pursue it, and that's just not how I've seen it work in my life. God in a lot of ways forces us into it, or our own sense of brokenness forces us into it, where then we get to make an intentional choice. Like if it was up to me, I probably would shelf it most times. Like most time I've been hurt, I'm gonna put it on the shelf. I'll let it go. I'll push it away, but it keeps coming back up, and that's how you know you haven't processed forgiveness enough.
Yeah.
Then you get to be intentional. But I don't often choose to walk in it.
Yeah.
So maybe let's go here a bit further. I think when we talk about forgiveness, we can kind of bring in all of our own experiences. And so what is forgiveness not? What are some of the things that like we kind of confuse forgiveness with? Yeah,
forgiveness doesn't equal trust. Again, Henry Nouwen got this book called Trust. Recommend it very much so. Did I say Henry Nouwen? Henry Cloud. Oh, Henry Nouwen also very great. Probably has some good stuff on forgiveness. He says forgiveness has to do with the past. Trust has to do with the future. And so we can forgive, but I have to know in my head, like forgiveness doesn't automatically mean reconciliation or our relationship is back to what it was. I'm going to trust you again. No, forgiveness is I am canceling the debt, or I am not allowing the pain in which you caused and inflicted on me to carry on in my own soul.
I think too, like that recognizes that God works his own timing in things. And I think we think forgiveness is putting in trust, or like we can take it the other way. It is letting someone off the hook of like, we never confront any of the choices they made, how they've hurt us, any of like inappropriate behavior. It's just like, we'll forgive and forget. But really it's saying like, we'll forgive, but there's also an invitation to step in and to have a conversation about why something was hurtful and how steps can be taken.
Yeah.
So many of the negative emotions we feel are just corruptions of positive things that God has built into us. And so this sense of revenge that so many of us have, that when we're hurt, is just a perverted sense of justice. Like God is a just God who will bring about justice for all evil done. And then what the enemy's done is he's broken that in it. He's maligned that. He's damaged that in us. So now we feel a sense of revenge. Like there's a hardwired piece of us that does want justice for the places we've been wronged. And what forgiveness isn't is just to say, that doesn't matter. That's obsolete. It's never going to happen. It's just forgiveness is a redemption of that sense of revenge that says, no, this revenge isn't for me to be able to seek or to walk in. God in his perfect justice will do what he needs to do to make this right.
That's good.
And he involves us in it too. Like,
yeah.
It's not just us like waiting around for God to do something, but he makes clear invitations for us to be involved in it as well. But like the ultimate perfection of his justice comes from him and him alone.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think of some of the cool stories you'll eventually find on the news of people who sit in courtrooms and they forgive those who have committed crimes against them. But what doesn't happen there is then they just take the handcuffs off and the other person gets to leave.
There's still consequences.
There's still consequences, right? I think of the one that happened in Houston where I think if I'm remembering it right, someone killed a sibling and then this other sibling came to testify, and from the what do they call it? It's not the pulpit, the
witness stand?
The witness stand. They forgave the person who sat over there, and yet the trial proceeded, and the person had just consequences. And that's part of it too. It's like that person wasn't just allowed to now walk free. They still had committed wrong, and there's a sense of justice that needed to be accomplished.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think we can go one step further. When we're asked to forgive, I think something that we need to do is look at the track record of what's going wrong or what has been going on, and just seeing like, are there places where we need to put up boundaries in this relationship? And that's okay. You can still forgive, and you can also, like, there may be consequences, but there also can be boundaries put up for the sake of our own health when we're in relationship with people.
Yeah.
And that's where scripture can sometimes get weaponized by people of privilege or people of power, where it's like, hey, the scriptures talk so powerfully about forgiveness, but it doesn't mean you get steamrolled as a human being. It doesn't mean that you don't have rights. It doesn't mean that you don't deserve justice or care or worth. Like if those are things being taken from you, or if you are being harmed in a situation, though, like God's grace for you in that is to be able to remove yourself, to find boundaries, to get healing, to be safe, and then to process through forgiveness and to work through a thing of reconciliation. Yep. Like forgiveness doesn't keep the victim in a place of oppression. That's not how God's kingdom works.
That's good.
I think it's Henry Cloud in his book on boundaries, but he talks about how boundaries are fences. And so fences aren't permanent structures. They're meant to be moved and changed. And so part of like the forgiveness process and part of discerning your boundaries is saying, where do they need to be at right now? Mm-hmm. And then being open to how do these need to change? Can I, as I rebuild trust with this person, can I loosen some of the boundaries? Or as as I've tried to rebuild trust and it's not worked out, what boundaries need to get more strict?
Yeah, that's good.
But I think as we keep going here, I think one of the hardest things about forgiveness is that it's not always dependent on someone else's actions, that I am called to forgive someone no matter if they change their behavior or if they apologize.
Yeah.
And that is frustrating.
It's super hard. Yeah. It's super, it goes against it's the human aspect of justice, I think, that we feel.
Yeah.
It goes against everything that makes sense. But I think it's because we've not defined forgiveness or understood what it fully means. So if the command of God is to forgive, and forgive is to release the debt of someone's wrongdoing in my life, again, what forgiveness is not restoration, it's not reconciliation, it's not trust. So I can forgive even in the midst of feeling pain and frustration and anger, even if the other person doesn't feel sorry. Like it's possible with the healthy understanding of what forgiveness is, still makes it insanely difficult.
Part of it, I feel like it's changing what we put our trust in. You know, like when we choose to forgive, it isn't necessarily this, I'm going to put my trust in this situation or this person, but we choose to trust God in his justice in a way that actually lets us believe that what we're talking about is true. Because that's where it comes down to, right? Like if I forgive this person, do I trust that there can be justice from God's part, that I trust that there will be like his redemptive in this story? Like that's where the trust really falls, is how much do I trust that God's going to do what he's promised to do in the place where I've been wounded?
Yeah.
I think too, asking the question of like, what do we desire out of God's justice?
Yeah, what do we want?
Is it just like we want the vengeance, or are we seeking the unity that his justice brings?
And I mean, even do we trust that God is wise enough, sovereign enough, holy enough, just enough to be patient in that, to allow that person to come to repentance, to allow them to be forgiven of their wrong? Like, because some of us, if we're honest, we don't trust God in that place because we've been wounded so bad. We
want it.
No, we want God to bring the wrath of or like at some point. But if that person then walks in Jesus' redemptive grace, like, do we trust that? Do we even trust that? Can we trust God that he is so kind to all of his creation that he will let anyone come to repentance if they walk in in what? Like,
which goes back to, why can I forgive? Because I've been forgiven.
Absolutely.
It's I'm not going to judge. Otherwise, I'm going to be judged. Because then I'm going to look at, well, here's the sins that I've committed against humanity, against God. And without the forgiveness of God, I sit condemned. I sit guilty and stayed guilty and deserve consequences of that, which Jesus took on the cross and through his resurrection. But so therefore I don't judge. I don't come. I trust God that the justice will happen in his timing and his way. Still hard.
And that's where forgiveness becomes a declaration of the gospel message. That there's language out there that forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you. And I hold that to an extent, right? Because it is like most situations where you're wrestling with forgiveness, what you're holding so heavily, the offender often isn't.
Almost ever.
Because they don't feel the same guilt or conviction or shame that you feel in that same. So you're holding this huge burden of bitterness and frustration, and they're not. And so yes, forgiveness releases that debt, it releases that burden. But when forgiveness declares the gospel message, whether you publicly tell this person or not, like the way that you choose to walk in it is grace to them, whether they recognize it or not.
Agreed. Yeah.
And so it's declaration, over yourself, that Jesus has forgiven me, and so I forgive others. But it's a declaration to them and to the world.
Yeah, and I think the language of forgiveness is more for you is that if I don't forgive, I'm holding on to bitterness, right? Which just is detrimental to the soul. But then, alongside, I forgive because he's forgiven, and it is for the others. Like, there's a reality. Many times, I mean, every time you see it in a courtroom, there's a reason that the guilty person breaks down when they're forgiven by someone who's close to the person.
When we're called to be salt and light, I mean, what a way to be salt and light. Like, and they might not recognize the beauty of the light when you do it, but at some point, by God and His grace, it's there. It's there.
Seed.
It's a seed. As gospel bearers, what a powerful way to make a declaration is to be forgivers.
That's good.
I think too, like, I was reading through the Sermon on the Mount yesterday, and honestly, forgiveness is probably the best act of worship we can do as followers of Jesus. It's not just us coming to worship on Sunday, raising our hands, singing the song, but it's us embodying and extending what God has freely given us. And so, like, it talks in anger, where it's like, if you're about to go offer a sacrifice, but you are in wrong standing with your brother, leave your sacrifice and then go make yourself right with your brother. And so there's an emphasis on what does it mean for us to be people who represent the love of God over, can we offer God the right thing?
That's good.
But I think, like, we kind of hit on just, like, the first part of what it looks like to model forgiveness well, and it's really just remembering who God is. He is the one who holds our justice, but I think, too, He is the one who is active, and He sees us. And I think in places where I have found it really hard to forgive, one of the questions I've had to wrestle with God with is, like, do you even see what's going on right now? And so I think it's like I've sat in places where it's like, do you even see how this person is repeatedly treating me? Because it's frustrating.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know you're just, but, like, I don't think you, like, were in this meeting today, or, like, I don't think you actually, like, heard the words that were spoken to me today. And I think part of walking in forgiveness well is remembering that God is with us in every single moment. No moment is wasted, but every moment is an opportunity for us to keep proclaiming the gospel, even through our actions.
That's really good.
I read a blog from Focus on the Family, and they had this quote here, and it said that withholding forgiveness is a refusal to let go of perceived power. And that really resonated a lot with my story, because a lot of what I've had to walk through in forgiveness has been recognizing that I'm not in charge. I actually have very little power, very little control of what's going on. And so when I choose to withhold forgiveness for someone else, I'm trying to assert a power and a dominance that I don't have, which then leads to a mistrust in the character of God.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever thought about forgiveness attached to humility in that way, attached to submission in that way, because that's, I mean, what I'm hearing from what you're describing is to release my own sense of power is to submit to a, and, like, what humility to say, oof, like, I am less enough to be able to, like, I never thought about it like that. That's good.
That's good.
Doesn't mean I have it figured out, but
it's a
good thought.
Like,
it's the concept's there. It's where it has to start.
So when we move beyond just remembering who God is, which is sometimes just in our own connection to Jesus, He's going to, like, some of the time where people avoid the presence of God is because they don't want to deal with what we're talking about right here. Because God, in His love and His kindness, He wants to move in our areas of brokenness. And so you step into the scriptures and you read the Sermon on the Mount, and you cannot help but think about that place of wounding. Well, God's trying to lead you in forgiveness to that place. But once we move from, like, just remembering who God is, like, an active part of it is then praying for those who hurt us.
Yeah. This actually is, it's how do you model forgiveness? But, like, for me, this has been a step in which I've been able, it's God's used to help me forgive someone. Because yes, the command is forgive. And there's been, has helped me move in the path of forgiveness, because forgiveness always isn't just a one-time thing. I think of people who've hurt me, and it's like, people kept telling me, well, Luke 6:28, bless those who curse you, pray for those who hurt you or mistreat you. It's like, how? I don't want to, because they hurt me and mistreat me. And so then I went through a process of, like, well, what's the greatest blessing someone could have in their life? I mean, it's the gospel. It's saving faith in Jesus. So that's what I'd pray for those who hurt me. I can pray that for those who hurt me. And then it changed over the course. But I noticed that as I prayed for those who legitimately hurt me in my life, who mistreated me, who I felt like were a curse in my life, as I literally prayed God's blessing over them, it became easier to release the bitterness over time, continually. And so it's just praying for those who have hurt us. It helps me look past the pain, not in a sense of just letting it go and forgetting that it happened, but in an opportunity to see, in their own brokenness, I know, again, it's a reminder that God's forgiven me, so I can forgive, like, I'm also broken. And I remember the forgiveness of God for me. There's something about, as I prayed for other people, I've been reminded of the goodness of God's grace and the gospel continuously.
Did you notice that praying for them changed the way that you thought about them or talked about
That's
them?
exactly it. Yeah. I couldn't talk about them for a long time. What changed was how I thought about them, which ultimately changed how I was able to speak about them. But absolutely, yeah, which opened eyes to see that, like, also created in God's image, also need Jesus. But it's a process, because all I could remember and think and sit in was the hurt and the pain for so long, because it was just so evident in there. And every time I thought of them or their name came up, all I'd go to is the immediate hurt. And so by praying but this is the intentional part, is like, but I could pray for blessing even when it's hard. And sometimes it was a 3-word prayer, because that's literally all I could do in a moment. And then that got easier, and it opened up to see, who they are.
I'm sorry, I'm looking up a quote real quick, and of course I'm not gonna be able to find it by the time doesn't matter. I know generally what it says, and I think part of it is like, we think it's prayer is not preparing us for the greater work. Prayer is the greater work.
Yeah,
and sometimes is it Wesley? Mm-hmm. Oh, jeez, man, come on. I want to say Charles Spurgeon, but I was like, I don't think that's right.
I'm sure multiple theologians have said this.
But the beauty of it is like, okay, sometimes we think forgiveness is the act where I walk up to them and we shake hands and we hug and we walk away. And so prayer is this tool that I have to, it's the hoop I have to jump to eventually get to that place. Where it's like, what we're describing and what the truth of the gospel is no, prayer is this deeper internal work where, yes, God changes you from the inside out, where eventually one day maybe you might get to that place. Like that mountaintop moment of the reconciliation is not the promise of Jesus. Mm-hmm. It's a hope, it's a desire, it's a longing to live at peace with all people. But the promise of Jesus is, as you do the internal work of prayer, you will be freed.
Yeah, that's good.
I think, too, that hits on one of our other points here of, like, we talked about boundaries a little bit, but even when reconciliation isn't possible, I think we still need to find a way to forgive, but we also need to find a way to live and to enjoy the life that God has given us here in the present moment. And I think sometimes when we withhold forgiveness, or we are just very trapped in the heavy feelings that hurt can bring, we start to overanalyze every single thing that we do and every single moment from the past that we're not in anymore. And when we do that, we don't actually get to live and enjoy the gifts and the blessings that God has been pouring out to us in the present.
Yeah.
Here's a thought I've been kicking around lately. I don't feel that I often can establish boundaries for the places in my life that I most desperately need boundaries without the help of others.
Yeah, agreed.
And there's a quote, Jonathan Pokuda, pastor, he says, I trust myself the least when I want something the most. And that goes to all kinds of different things. But one of them is like, when I want revenge, when I want vindication, when I want that act of retaliation, like to set up boundaries, when I want to inflict my own justice, it's like I'm so blinded by hurt and brokenness and bitterness that I often need a wise mentor. I need a friend. I need someone in my life who's going to help me establish those boundaries, because I'm too close to it to be able to see clearly what is really healthy for me. And that's a hard thing too, even to invite someone else into the brokenness, to say, hey, like, I'm so broken in this area that for me to get well, I need your help to establish some of these fences.
Yep. Because you just can't see it.
You can't see it.
Yep.
You're so blind to it, and that's not your fault. That's a part of the problem is when you're wounded in that way, to say, okay, well, what's the boundary I now need with this person? It's like, you probably don't see them in a correct light. You don't think about them well. Your emotions are so entangled in that. So to establish a boundary on your own in that relationship, while that seems straightforward, is probably way messier. And you need some communal help.
And the beauty of community in that, especially if you have trusted community and you know who you're talking to and processing with, they care about your health as much as you care about your own health. It's sometimes, like, depending on who I'm talking to about setting up a boundary. Yeah. I have to first get to a spot of making sure that decision that I'm setting up, or the boundary I'm making, is coming from wisdom, a place of wisdom and health. Because if I just make the decision without processing community with people who care about me, make sure I want to be healthy and wise, I'm going to make a boundary that's unhealthy or just out of bitterness instead of and I need people in my life to process through, like, all right, I need to make, like, the boundary in itself isn't the wrong thing. But if I make it out of a sense of unhealth, then it is the wrong thing.
Our supervisor here, I think he ripped it off from Craig Rochelle, but he asked the question, what advice would I give to someone else if they were in my shoes? And I think that plays really well into boundaries too. Because when we look at, you've got a toxic relationship where this boyfriend and girlfriend, and the boyfriend keeps treating the girlfriend like bad, but the girlfriend won't leave because she loves him and cares for him, and she keeps trying to establish boundaries. But if you look at it, like if I was in that situation, I would very clearly say, cut ties, stop talking, But when you're in it, you can't see it.
Correct.
And so for us, it's like, hey, I have a parent who just speaks unkind words over me consistently. And you're like, well, but they're my mom and they're my dad, and like I really care for them, and like all. But if someone else was in my shoes and I was talking to my friend and their parents, like I would say, hey, you need to establish some boundaries, and you need. But when we're in it, it's just so hard. So sometimes we just need that help, like you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think too, like remembering just like it's not a work that we have to muster our strength up for, but it is a work that is empowered by the Spirit of God who lives within us.
Yeah.
And so as we kind of wrap up today, that's my encouragement to you guys of one, like trust that the Spirit of God will empower you to forgive the people in your life that naturally hurt you. But when you do that, know that you are proclaiming an incredible message to the entire world. You are like physically, emotionally, spiritually embodying the entirety of the gospel message of who Jesus is. And that is some of the best worship that you could ever bring.
Yeah.
So
I like that, like just the language of, I think again, from the trust book, it's forgiveness says I'm okay with, like, I'm not allowing the pain and hurt that you've given me to affect me anymore in some way, shape, or form. Reconciliation and restoration is we're okay. Trust is now we can move forward into actually like maybe developing a deep relationship again if possible. And the only command from Scripture is not that you have to trust, not even that you have to pursue reconciliation, but that you have to forgive. So forgive is a command, reconciliation is the goal, trust is the ideal.
Yeah.
Just know that.
That's good. All right. Praying for you out there if you're walking through this.
Peace out.